¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos?
Welcome, friends, to CHIRLA TV and another episode that we have here for you all. Some great updates here. We've talked about federal updates. We talked about local updates. This one happens to be a little bit more on the state updates, as we have our friend of the show, Joseph Villela, who's a director of policy at CHIRLA, longtime CHIRLA staff member. Ya llevas ¿cuánto tiempo, Joseph?
16 años.
16 años, yeah. So welcome to the show again. I hope you're doing well.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's good to be back and good to tell our audience about what's going on in the Golden State and some of the policies that we have advanced despite some of the challenges that our state has facing.
Yeah, CHIRLA for a couple of years has been pushing forward in a policy agenda around the Golden Promise, right? And moving forward, pro-immigrant agenda, pro-worker, pro-family agenda in the state of California. And as you all know and experience, 2020 was difficult with the pandemic. We had to make some adjustments in the state. We had to request our legislators to respond to the emergency. But 2021, still some difficulties, but there's like at the light at the end of the tunnel. Can you talk about what has been the policy agenda, the portfolio for this year?
Yeah, so first let me start by first saying to the audience, make sure that you vaccinate. I think if we want to get out of this pandemic, we want to make sure that we are vaccinated ourselves, because we love our loved ones and we want to make sure that we go back to normal. The only way to get out of this pandemic is through vaccination. And so one of the things that I want to highlight is what California is and who lives in California. In California, we have the largest population of immigrants, both undocumented, legalized, and naturalized. So that means that we have unique challenges when it came to the pandemic. Many of the jobs that were shut down or were affected by the pandemic had a direct impact to immigrant communities, especially immigrant women. So many of them have to leave their job because the schools were also shut down, and that meant that they had to take care of the kids. And so some of the challenges that we saw for immigrant communities and immigrant women was the fact that they were facing issues with not having a broadband, because at that point we have classes that you need to have like a good broadband, meaning or internet. So they didn't have that. Then there were issues regarding access to food. So many of them now, they were relying on lunches in the school. Now they had to feed the whole family inside the house without a job. And so that means that many of our communities were going hungry. And so those were some of the unique challenges. And the other challenge that we had is that we didn't have a safety net for undocumented immigrants. Undocumented immigrants do not qualify for any benefit at the federal level or at the state level. So that means that we had nothing as an infrastructure to protect them. So we needed to build something for them in 2020. And so some of those were the unique challenges that we have with our communities.
And how did the state legislators, the governor respond when CHIRLA was reaching out with, presenting these challenges to them?
Well, first, there's always an issue about fiscal deficits. And so it's also important to know that during the pandemic, between January and all the way to May of 2020, we were projected to have a $50 billion deficit in our state. So when you usually have a deficit, that means that there's going to be some cuts in social programs. And so one of the challenges that we had is that the elected officials were saying, we need to prioritize populations and how much resources they're going to get based on the potential deficit that we have. And so undocumented immigrants, to be honest, were not on high priority to some. And so we actually had to fight and make sure that undocumented immigrants were part of the priority. And we worked with the Latino caucus, which is a powerful caucus in Sacramento. The governor was receptive to some of the messages. And at the end of the day, one of the things that we wanted to make sure is that testing was available for folks regardless of immigration status or regardless of insurance, that they didn't ask for any documentation, etc., that any treatment was available regardless of status. And the other aspect is that I wanted to create some programs for them, such as a one-time allocation of $500 that the governor initiated, which was not a lot, but it was the first step that then allowed for the opening of other relief for them.
That was last year's disaster relief program, correct? Talk to us, Joseph, real quick about about this health for all and health for adults over 50 years old. This is a landmark budget allocation. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we start to notice is that the pandemic allows elected officials, to realize that immigrants have been a key aspect of our economy, and they were essential workers. So 1/3 of the essential workers were immigrants themselves. But then we saw that many of them were also affected by COVID because they were exposed. So many were actually being infected, and unfortunately many died. And so one of the things that we did is that this allow us to push for having access to state medical for all, regardless of status, at the ages of 50 and older. So this is a big win because we've been trying to fight for that for many decades. And the fact that many of individuals were affected by COVID were elderly, 50 and older. So that means that we needed to have a preventive system for them. And in this budget, the governor finally agreed to invest significantly on that and make this a permanent program. So we're very happy starting next year, undocumented immigrants over 50 are going to have access to state-funded medical, in which will be preventive, but then also will be for emergency purposes.
Nosotros como comunidad inmigrante sabemos muy bien la necesidad que es tener un tipo de protección seguro médico, y por eso empujamos para la salud para todos, este programa. Y pues bueno, vamos a platicar más sobre esto después de estos comerciales.
¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos?
Welcome back to CHIRLA TV. Estamos platicando aquí con el director de póliza de CHIRLA, Joseph Villela, que nos comentó que tenemos un programa nuevo que ya se viene el próximo año aquí en California para darle salud médica a cualquier persona sin importar su estado migratorio. ¿Por qué es esto tan importante para la población inmigrante de California, Joseph?
Bueno, primero hay que recalcar, ¿verdad?, que la población inmigrante aquí en California es aproximadamente 2 millones de personas. Más del 80% de ellas han estado viviendo en California por mínimo 10 años. Esto quiere decir que ellos tienen familiares aquí, trabajos aquí y han pagado sus impuestos cada año. So, a tener acceso a médico completo y comprensivo no tan solo es beneficiario para el Estado, sino también reconoce sus contribuciones de ellos económicas, pero lo más importante, reconoce su humanidad, porque al final de cuentas nosotros creemos que el acceso a un servicio, a medicina o salud, ¿verdad?, es un derecho humano, no es un privilegio.
Así es, y este tipo de valor, ¿no?, y mensaje lo he escuchado por varios años. Hace unos años pasó que para los niños empezamos con eso. ¿Cuál es esa trayectoria de esa lucha?
Lo que hemos, a final de cuentas, queremos, nuestra visión final, ¿verdad?, es de que todos aquí en California tengamos un seguro completo y comprensivo y que no nos tengamos que preocupar de no ir al médico hasta que algo sea más problemático. Entonces hemos avanzado políticas primero tratando de dar cobertura a los menores de 0 a 18 años. Eso se cumplió aproximadamente 4 años. Hace 3 años se avanzó a 0 a 26 años. Y este año por fin avanzamos a personas de 50 en adelante. Entonces aquí en California casi está cumpliendo esa visión que tenemos. Hay mucho trabajo por hacer, pero a final de cuentas la persona inmigrante, especialmente aquí indocumentada, también necesita algo seguro para ellos, porque al final de cuentas también ellos tienen otros problemas únicos, ¿verdad? Como por ejemplo no tener acceso a comida y entonces tener algo de salud permanente les da, digamos, a mínimo un tipo de paz para ellos, por si se llegan a enfermar, no esperar hasta el último momento e ir como hacemos todos, ¿verdad?, al hospital de emergencia, donde a lo mejor ya es muy tarde.
And this is all due to the Golden Promise that CHIRLA has been working on. Anything else that has been included in this year's fight or in last year's fight that you would like to share?
Yeah, so I think it's important to recognize that where California has been. So, let's remember that less than about 15 years ago, we had a Republican governor. And in 1994, we had another Republican governor in which they were advancing draconian and anti-immigrant policies in which, people were not able to drive, without fear because they didn't have access to a driver's license. They were not able to go to school because the documentation was required. So advance that 20 years plus. What we've done this year and through the vision of the Golden Promise is making sure that folks have access to healthcare, making sure that students, regardless of immigration status, whether they have DACA or not, they have access to education, and not only to go to college, but then also to financial aid, but then also opportunities to finish the 4-year degree. So in this budget, what we created is 2 programs for those students specifically. One is to have what we call dream liaisons in all community colleges to make sure that folks have someone they can rely to help them through the process. And the other one is a service grant, some sort of a work study for undocumented students, in which they not only get a place in a nonprofit or an organizations to get experience, but they also get paid. And at the end of the day, when you're in college, you need to get some of those internships to then potentially land a job in the future. So we're trying to make sure that folks finish school and have access to opportunities in the future.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think that it's not just about, no longer just about justice, it's no longer just about equality, but now it's equity. It's no longer about trying to get folks to survive, but rather to thrive in the state that they call their home, regardless of their immigration status. And that's what we're all about here at CHIRLA TV. You don't want to move. You want to continue staying with us to hear more about this policy agenda. We'll be right back.
¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos?
We're back talking about the policy agenda that CHIRLA has been working on and some of the things that we've seen, some of the wins that we've seen this year. Joseph, let's transition a little bit from services to the actual payment or support for legal services for immigrants in the state of California. This is something that we've seen for a couple of years and we've talked about, but what's the update for this year?
So first, let me start by talking about the big picture. So we are in potentially going to see a big win in Washington, D.C. No, it's knock on wood that everything goes, as planned, but it is likely that Congress is going to provide legalization, for undocumented immigrants in this budget reconciliation. So if that goes through, that means that about 5 to 8 million undocumented immigrants will have access to legal status. But after that win, and we're putting everything that we can to make sure that that is realized this year, then there comes the real work, meaning that people have to have access to the benefit. And one of the challenges of that is that, if for a family of 4 who is undocumented, that means that they have to get an attorney for the 4 members of the family. That means that they have to pay that attorney for different bills, and that means that they have to pay 4 different applications. So one of the big obstacles that is going to happen to our community is the lack of resources to get legalization. And so one of the things that we've been asking the state of California, which is going to benefit the most if we have legalization, is to make sure that they invest significantly in not-profit organizations for those organizations to provide free legal services to undocumented immigrants. And so in this budget, we were very happy and worked really hard to make sure that Governor Newsom allocated $30 million for legal services, allocated $20 million to help DACA students and those who are eligible to become citizens to pay for that actual application, which is between 500, for DACA applications, about 800 to 900 to citizenship. So those folks can then get that benefit. But in addition to that, he, maintained the core funding for legal services, which is about $65 million. So this budget, we were able to allocate approximately $100 million in the state of California for legal services. This is going to help nonprofit organizations in California to make sure that we are ready for a legalization program. It's not going to be enough, but it's going to lay the foundation to make sure that our communities do not go into immigration consultants or notario, get defrauded out of their money, and then put in deportation proceedings. And so for us, it's important that our community deserves quality legal services, and that means that they need to see an attorney. And we also see responsibility from the state. Again, 80% of the undocumented population in California have been minimum living or residing in our state for 10 years. That means that they have contributed every single year paying their taxes, and now it's time for Californians to be there for them.
Not just paying their taxes, but anytime there's a purchase, you go to your local supermarket, you go buy clothes, any of the shopping that folks do, there is the taxing that happens that California collects, right? So definitely goes beyond that. But is there another state like California that's moving an agenda like this, or to this extent, or is California unique?
We're unique in the fact that we are investing more than $100 million, and we're investing, and the legislature has recognized that once someone gets legal status, then that person income increases dramatically because it goes into the formal industry. That person has access to financial services or can actually purchase a car or a house. So the economic benefits are greater for folks once they legalize their status. But we have also seen other states, such as Illinois, Washington State, and also New Mexico and Nevada trying to do these investments, but at times it's not enough for states because we have 52 states plus territories. And so one of the things that we at CHIRLA are trying to do also at the federal level is to make sure that the federal government invests in legal services. So in this budget fight that we have right now going out in Congress, we're asking for a minimum investment of $100 million for services for citizenship, and also a minimum $75 million to provide legal counsel for folks who are in deportation proceedings. So we are also demanding that the federal government invest in legal services to help our communities.
Because we've seen that this works, and that we've seen that that is what matters and gets people to make sure that they don't have any challenges or barriers to seeking what they're open to, right? Well, a program that's open for them. And so that's why we're pushing this forward. Just we have a few seconds here, Joseph. What do we got to do to make sure that the federal government does include this funding?
Well, first and foremost, people have to engage, so I think they have to call their member of Congress. And if they can, engage in our fight, go to our social platforms, and then we will route you to how you can be involved. And most importantly, to speak on behalf of your parents if you're a child of immigrant, or speak for yourself if you're an immigrant. Because at the end of the day, if you don't speak, you're not going to be listened.
Mm-hmm. That's right. We're going to put that in a quote. We're going to tweet it. We'll be right back after this commercial break.
¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos?
Great. So we're back here at CHIRLA TV. We've been discussing the trajectory around the policies that have been won in California that affect immigrants. We've talked about the landmark legislation around health for people who are over 50 years old. And we've talked about other policies that CHIRLA has been pushing for. And here, Joseph, if you can just talk now about the future. What's the vision for 4 years for CHIRLA, for the organization, and for immigrants looking ahead?
So my personal vision, is that, let's say 5 years from now, I've been working at CHIRLA for the last 16 years. And so my hope is that California go beyond on some of the promises that we have made to immigrant communities. So what does that mean? We have fought for driver license, we have fought for access to education, and we have fought for our place in politics in California. I feel that we have to go a little bit beyond more in the next 5 years here in California. I think now we're talking about economic prosperity and shared prosperity to immigrant communities. After they get their driver license, after they have access to education, it is time now for them to start getting into those good jobs. So if we're talking about green jobs, we also have to make sure that there's a strategy to include immigrants there in those green jobs. If we're talking about a shift in the economy, we want to make sure that we include immigrants in that economy. What COVID did for us is that it allowed us to see the importance of immigrants, especially during the sectors that they are, because they became our essential workers. But it also allow us to see the inequalities, how there's a lack of investment to our communities, and I feel that there has to be significant investment on workforce development. So again, making sure if we have a legalization program enacted, that our dads, our moms, our uncles, and tias have access to good jobs when they get their green card. Otherwise, they will not have access to what we call the dream, the dream that they came from. And so I think my vision for California is significant investment and making sure that our economy is inclusive to immigrants and that shared prosperity is actually equitable to our communities.
Another thing that I would like to hear your take on was this idea that's been floating around for some time, which is una identificación para personas indocumentadas, pero una identificación como de California. ¿Me puede explicar un poquito más de qué se trata eso?
Sí, lo que California ha hecho, ¿verdad?, es de que estamos dando ahorita licencias de manejo a personas sin importar su estatus migratorio. Hemos pensado, ¿verdad?, que es tiempo que California también dé un ID. Aquí en California uno puede agarrar su licencia o tu ID. Pensamos que ya es tiempo de que California dé IDs a las personas, sin importar su estatus migratorio. Porque hay que reconocer que muchas de nuestras comunidades no están manejando. Primera, porque no pueden manejar o deciden no manejar, o simplemente no tienen el dinero para comprar su carro o tener una aseguranza para poder manejar. Entonces es muy importante que reconozcamos a estas personas y les demos un ID. Y al final de cuentas, esto lo que da es de que reconoce que ellos están viviendo aquí, sus contribuciones y su humanidad, y no que sean invisibles, porque si una persona desafortunadamente a lo mejor no tiene un ID, se siente que no es parte de la sociedad de California.
No solo eso, también las interacciones que tenemos también con la policía, por ejemplo. Hay muchas veces que la gente dice, pues, ¿qué hago en ese momento? Porque hemos tenido segmentos sobre conozca sus derechos, de no compartir o un pasaporte o un documento que diga a la policía que eres indocumentado. Entonces la gente se queda ahí, pues, entonces, ¿qué hago? ¿No? ¿Qué hago? Y hemos recomendado otras cosas como, por ejemplo, identificaciones de escuela de adultos, si es que están atendiendo. Y a algunos sí les ha ayudado, pero esta idea como de una identificación de California resolviera algunos problemas tan básicos como lo que es comprar medicina cuando uno está enfermo. You know, I've gone to you know, your big box store to get medicine, and they ask you for an ID when you're getting for cold medicine, for example. And so that's the importance of having an ID. What about for legal services? What's the vision for the future of that? I know you talked about that we got to $100 million in funding for legal services. What's next, or where are we going after that?
So I think one of the things to note is that immigration is a civil issue, even though our communities are criminalized, but in reality it's a civil offense. So that means that people don't have the same right, meaning like I don't have the right to counsel when I'm fighting my deportation. So that means that there has to be significant investment to make sure that anyone who is in deportation proceedings have access to a counsel. And I think that's the vision, essentially making sure that if there's a remedy for you to legalize your status, that the cost of having an attorney does not prevent you for getting that benefit or that relief or that defense. So essentially that's the vision. 100 million is significant resources, but it's not enough to cover the 2 million undocumented immigrants that we have in our state.
That's right. And we didn't get a chance to discuss here, but also the issue of detention centers in the state of California, something that would be ongoing as well, that we would need to limit or remove detention centers in California, especially private ones. But thank you so much, Joseph, for being here with us, joining us, sharing your knowledge. Really appreciate chatting with you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.
¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos? ¿Quiénes somos?